Morning.
Morning.
I was told last week that I've come to be known here as the easel guy. So I've tried to not bring the easel so I can restore my reputation as the handsome guy or something. I don't know. So I'll try and break away from the easel. Got to keep you all guessing a little bit. I think that's important. This past week I attended a funeral service for a friend and coworker. And it was at a African American church. I was one of, counted out of about 300 people there, one of 3 white individuals. And it was a blessing to be there. It reminded me of my time in Africa. A lot of swaying, a lot of clapping, a lot of movement in the worship, a lot of energy, and it just brought me back to my time in Africa. And then as I was sitting there, just enjoying a different style of worship, not a better one, just different. Just kind of wondering, and thinking about another story involving Africa that my dad shared with me. My dad was visiting Nigeria on a mission trip. Probably like 15 years ago now, and the local pastor was giving him and some other missionaries that were there visiting a tour of the main city, and specifically a tour highlighting the places of worship within the city. And I guess at one point in time the Nigerian government had decided to give just under $1 million to the 3 major religions or denominations in that city to build a central place of worship. So they gave just under $1 million to build a mosque for those that were participating in the Islamic religion. They gave just under $1 million to the Catholic Church to build a church for them to go worship in, and then they gave just under $1 million to the Protestant Church, because those were the 3 dominant religions in this area, in this main city. And so they gave this money to the church, and the churches went and built their places of worship. And so my dad had the privilege and honor of visiting each of these 3 locations. And when they got to the mosque, it was, of course, this big, beautiful, gorgeous building. When they got to the Catholic Church's place of worship, and again, big, beautiful building with stained glass windows and just gorgeous. Gorgeous church. The tour went on, and then they came to this shell of a building that wasn't finished. And of course they had to ask, what is this? Why have you brought us here after these 2 beautiful, gorgeous buildings? And the local pastor explained, well, this is the Protestant church. They started it but couldn't agree on what it would look like, so they never finished it. And we laugh, but it's deeply sad that they couldn't agree on what the physical structure of this church would look like. And as a result, it sits there as a shell of what it could be, a testament of the church's divided mind on our lack of unity. Did you know that it is believed there are 2.3 billion, I am not misquoting that number, 2.3 billion different branches of the Christian church today? Think about that number for a second. 2.3 billion different branches of the Christian church. It is estimated that up to 10,000 churches split every year in the United States alone. 10,000 every year. How did we get to this point that we can't agree on buildings so they are testaments of half-finished products, that we have 2.3 billion different beliefs about really basically the same belief system, that we have 10,000 churches every year splitting up within just this country? How did we get here? This is a really important question, because this was really important to Jesus. In the book of John, chapter 17, when Jesus is in the garden, right before he's about to face the cross. One of the emphases of his prayer is that the world would know we are the true church by what? Our unity. So as he's facing death, his focus isn't on himself, it's God, help them be unified, that the world may know they are the one true church. How far we have come for fulfilling that prayer. I want to look at a story in the book of Matthew that I think highlights two different ways that we fall victim in our churches to groupthink. Groupthink, if you don't know that term, it's this idea of we drop our individualistic way of viewing things, our way of being self-critical of what we see and examining and processing it, and we just join groupthink. Well, the majority is thinking that, or the majority is saying that, or my family's saying that, or my church is saying that, so I'm going to believe that too, instead of really stepping back and examining. So in the book of Matthew, chapter 12, we're going to look at two examples of groupthink that I believe have contributed to this place where the church as a whole is very divisive. So Matthew chapter 12, we're going to be looking at verses 22 through 26. Matthew chapter 12, verses 22 through 26. And I'm going to read the whole passage this morning. It says, "Then a demon-possessed man, who was blind and mute, was brought to Jesus. And he," that being Jesus, "healed him, so that the mute man spoke, and he saw. All the crowds were amazed, and they were saying, 'This man cannot be the son of David, can he?'" So they're asking that question about Jesus. "This man cannot be the son of David, can he?" But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "This man casts out demons only by Beelzebub, the ruler of the demons." And knowing their thoughts, Jesus said to them, "Any kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, and any city or house divided against itself will not stand." Verse 26, "If Satan casts out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then will his kingdom stand?" We have this scene unfolding that's really an amazing scene. And I think it's all too often we read the scriptures and we fail to really click on our imagination and think about what's happening here. We see it as just a story on a page, but this is a historical event that took place, and if you can place yourself in the shoes of those who are witnessing this event, it's really quite remarkable, isn't it? A demon-possessed man that is blind and mute is brought to Jesus in front of this entire crowd. And it says Jesus heals him so that the man can see, and the man then speaks and addresses the crowd. Now, as we know about times when Jesus was alive, they didn't have public transport like we do today. It was not easy to get around. It was not easy to get in a car and drive 45 minutes or an hour, or jump in a plane and go across the country. And so it is easy to assume and believe that this blind, mute man that was demon-possessed was a local man, and that the crowd that had gathered around Jesus was a local crowd. Meaning, most people that were present when this happened knew this man somewhat personally. That's part of small town living, isn't it? Even I live in the heart of downtown Grand Rapids, and I work in the heart of downtown Grand Rapids. And although Grand Rapids isn't a big city, it is a bigger city for Michigan. My little couple blocks feel like a small town to me, and here's why. Because I live and work there. I eat out there. I walk my dog there. The local restaurants know my name. As I'm walking my dog down the street, they'll wave at me through their windows. Because it feels like we're a small little attached community. That's how it would have been in Jesus' time. This mute, blind, demon-possessed man was brought before this crowd of people, and this crowd of people would have said something along the lines of, "Oh, that's Jim. That's Jim. He lives, 2 mutt shacks down from Bill. Oh, yeah, I know Jim. Jim's the cousin of Susan." There would have been these murmurs in the crowd of who this man was. They knew he was mute. They knew he was blind. He is brought before Jesus. The demon is cast out. He can see. He turns to this crowd that has some recollection of him, and he speaks. Can you imagine the gasp of everyone there? The jaws that hit the ground, the hands that come over the wide open mouth, the astonishment at what is taking place here in verses 22 to 26. It's mind-blowing. In fact, the Greek word for where it says that they were amazed, it says that they were amazed at what they saw. That Greek word means out of mind. Their minds were blown, literally in the Greek. Their minds were blown at what they just saw. I find it ironic that that is what that word amazed means in the Greek, because I want to emphasize something in this text that is taking place inside the mind. So the text says that their minds are blown. But I want to look at what's going on internally in the minds of all the people watching this miraculous thing take place. You see, what's taking place here is actually something that takes place in our brains every single day. And the response that we see is actually a response that we're seeing on a daily basis in our churches and especially in our country as a whole. And so I really want to examine what's taking place in their brains and in their minds and the response, because there's something we can very much learn from this. So here's what it is. We know that these are thoughts that the crowd is having, because it says down in verse 25, and knowing their thoughts, Jesus said. So, earlier in the text it says that the people are talking amongst themselves, which also might be true. But when you're in a big crowd and people are talking amongst themselves, it can be hard to distinguish what's being said exactly, can't it? So Jesus maybe is hearing these whispers and these murmurs in the crowd, but those whispers and murmurs are coming from what? The thought process. They're also thinking these things that they are now verbally processing out loud. And Jesus knows their thoughts. Let's look at the first crowd's response to what Jesus does in healing this man. Verse 23 says, all the crowds were amazed. Their minds were blown, basically. And they were saying, this man cannot be the son of David, can he? Before we study this group's particular response to Jesus' miracle, I want to point something out about our brains, or about our minds. And I think this is really, really fascinating. Whenever the Bible talks about the heart of man, it's most likely talking about our mind. And science has proven that our mind and our brain are two completely different things. Our brain is the actual physical object in our head, in our skull. If you want to think of a brain like a computer, like the hard drive of a computer, that would be accurate. Our mind is separate. It is like the software to the computer. Our mind shapes our brain. So you have your physical phone. I have an iPhone. This would be like the brain, the physical device. Every month, Apple releases something to me, a software update, to help make sure my phone is secure, running smoothly, all of those good things. That software update is like the mind. So our mind shapes our brain. Everybody with me so far? Now here's where I think this gets really fascinating, and I think really biblical, and where science, I believe, really backs up a lot of the teachings of the Bible. We are made in the image of God, correct? A lot of scholars would tell you that that image is not the physical image. It's not that God looks like a human being. But that when it says the image of God, it is talking about that mind aspect. That we have minds that are different than every other living creature on this planet. Now here's where this gets really cool. The human mind is actually divided into three parts. And I love that because we are made in God's image. And what is God? A triune God, right? The mind's divided into three parts. And you've heard of some of these parts. There's the conscious mind. That's the mind right now that is actively listening to what I'm saying, hopefully. The conscious mind is actually really amazing and this is one of the areas that separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. The conscious mind, when you're a human being, has the ability to step back and observe itself. So right now, you have the ability to hear what I'm saying, pause it, step outside of yourself, and think about what you just heard. You get to process it. You get to analyze it. You get to agree with it or disagree with it. You get to question it. This is what your conscious mind does. Animals don't have this conscious mind. It is not able to step outside of itself and reflect and analyze and tear apart. So there's the conscious mind. Then there's the subconscious mind. We've all heard of the subconscious mind, right? The subconscious mind actually acts like a portal or a bridge, and it takes information from your conscious mind that you have received, an experience, something you've heard, something you've read. Just as these people are experiencing this miracle in the crowd with their conscious mind, the subconscious mind acts like that pathway and pulls that information into what is called the unconscious, or some people call it the non-conscious mind. Okay? So we have our conscious mind and everything we experience, see, smell, hear. Our conscious mind takes that information. Well, it stays there in the conscious mind, and the subconscious mind takes that information and brings it all the way over to the non-conscious or unconscious mind. Why am I sharing all of this with you? Here's why. Because it actually plays an important part in this passage. Everyone in the crowd's conscious mind is getting this information that they are intaking. Here was a man that was demon-possessed. Here was a man we know that was mute and blind. He now speaks to us. He now sees. They're taking this information, and what they should do is their conscious mind should then take it and evaluate it and break it up and think about it properly. But what happens, and we see this from their response in their text, is their subconscious mind automatically takes this information and brings it into their unconscious mind. And our unconscious mind is mostly formed of things through repetition. Something that you think about repeatedly. Something you tell yourself. Something you hear over and over and over again. Something you hear and read and see, all saying the same thing. Our unconscious mind is the fastest moving part of our brain. It says something like, it's like it can operate 14 billion acts per second. I mean, it's unbelievable how quick the unconscious mind can work. It's our unconscious mind that keeps us breathing at night while we're sleeping. Because it doesn't have to think about it, it just does it. Because it knows how to do it through the repetition. It's our unconscious mind that allows me to, for the most part, stand up and speak to you in a way that makes sense with complete sentences, because it's something I've done most of my life, and my unconscious mind just makes it happen. I don't have to really think about talking to you right now. It just comes out. Same with my hand motions. They're part of my unconscious mind. I don't have to think about, okay, now swirl your hands as you talk about your mind. It just happens. Because of my unconscious mind. There is a danger that can come with the unconscious mind, though. Because it's the part of our brain that is formed through repetition, sometimes the unconscious mind can overtake the conscious mind. And that's a real shame, and here's why. Because the conscious mind is a gift from God that allows us to evaluate and analyze and think and have discernment. But if we let that unconscious part just jump that pathway, that subconscious pathway, and suck in information before we have the time to really analyze it, we end up becoming what we call creatures of habit, instead of creatures of continual learning, which is what we should be. Because I don't know about any of you, but I certainly don't have all of life figured out. Do you? If you do, come see me afterwards, or I'd love to preach a message on it. I just don't have the answers. I don't have my Christian faith completely figured out. I don't have God completely figured out. I don't have the Bible completely figured out. There's depth and there's mystery. It's bigger than me, which means I need to continually have a conscious mind, thinking about it, learning about it, asking questions, pursuing truth. But if my unconscious mind takes over and makes me think, oh, I got it figured out, well, I have a problem now. And that's the same problem we see from the crowd in this text by both of their responses. Back to the text. It says this in verse 23. All the crowds were amazed, their minds were blown, and they were saying, "This man cannot be the son of David. Can he?" The first group's unconscious response is one of false hope. One of false hope. And these are the two traps, or the two lures, that we can get pulled into that cause divisiveness of our mind. First one is false hope. The people asking that question, could this be the son of David? You see, they're on the right track mentally to who Jesus is. But these were Jewish people of Jewish heritage who their history, their national history, is just littered with them not having their own nationality and their own land. And so by the time Jesus comes along, as we all know, as we've heard in the sermons, many of the Jewish people in the nation of Israel saw Jesus as a king coming to redeem just their country, to overthrow Rome. That was the mindset of Jesus. That was what they were fixated on in their minds. Because they have heard that for generations, that a king will come to redeem us. And it's something they've longed for thousands of years. They were enslaved by Israel, right? By Egypt, I'm sorry. See, that's where your conscious mind should have kicked in and be like, what is he talking about? They were enslaved by Egypt. Then they wandered for 40 years. And then even when they did get the promised land, what happened? Bigger countries came in and conquered them, took them out of their land. Eventually they would get their land back. But then even when they got their land back, what happened? Bigger powers came in like Rome and still ruled over them. So to the Jewish people in this crowd, whose nationality was so near and dear to their heart, when they saw Jesus do this miraculous work, the first thing that they think of is that unconscious mind thought of, well, he must be from the lineage of David. He's going to redeem Israel, which is halfway true. He is from the lineage of David, but he didn't come for Israel. He came for the world. He came to establish a spiritual kingdom here on earth, not a material kingdom. And they missed it because their unconscious mind, through repetition, was so fixated on this false hope, they didn't see the real hope right in front of them. They missed out on something bigger and better because of this repetition of their unconscious brain. Does this make sense? I want to challenge you this morning that we also have, without even knowing it, placed our hope in false hopes. And you see it by how wound up people get, especially believers, over things like politics. I'm not going to get into the politics this morning, but I am going to tell you something that I believe is very biblically true. It doesn't matter who the President of the United States are. It doesn't change what God has called you to do. It doesn't change who's really on the throne. Can you have opinions about who the president should be and beliefs about it? Of course you can, and you should. But when I hear Christians, all is lost because so-and-so was voted in. What? This is a mere man overseeing a mere nation that is a blip on the radar of God's history of this world. It doesn't matter who the President of the United States is. Here's another controversial thing. I'm standing behind the podium in case you guys have rocks hitting and throwing me. God doesn't care about the Constitution of the United States. Is it an incredibly progressive, valuable document? Yes. Is it inspired by God? No! He doesn't care about it. Because whether that document exists or not, it doesn't change what we are called to do and who we are called to represent. Our hope is not in politics. It's not in man-made documents or philosophies or visions, no matter how brilliant they were 200 years ago when they wrote them. They are not our hope. And so why do we need to spend so much energy over them? Because our unconscious brain has taken over. And Instead of the conscious brain stepping back and saying, you know what, I'm not going to get pulled in to all this divisiveness, because it doesn't change the fundamentals and the core of who I've been called to be. There's enough to focus on there. I don't need to focus on this. This group made that mistake. They had a false hope. As a result of that false hope being so ingrained in their brain, they didn't get to see Jesus for who he really was. They missed it. I wonder what we're missing, because we are getting so preoccupied with false hopes that aren't the point of why we're here. The next group, the Pharisees. The Pharisees. Poor Pharisees. They've got a bad rap throughout history, haven't they? They are the butt of all biblical jokes. Look at the Pharisees' response in verse 25. Verse 24. But when the Pharisees heard this, they said, "This man casts out demons only by Beelzebul, the ruler of demons." Where is the Pharisees' unconscious mind at? Here's where their mind is at. They have a fear of being helpless. They have a fear of being helpless. If you know anything about the Pharisees, they were the religious leaders of Jesus' time, and Israel was a religious state. Its traditions, its history, its culture was based on the Jewish religion, the Hebrew religion. And so they were the most powerful people in the nation of Israel outside of who Rome would have appointed to oversee Israel. But Rome, as a conqueror, allowed all the places it conquered to keep its own religion and culture intact. And so they allowed the Jewish history and the Hebrew history to stay intact, and they allowed the religious leadership to stay intact, and that was the Pharisees, essentially. So these Pharisees had incredible amounts of power. And when Jesus strolls in and he's performing these amazing miracles, what do? They tighten up and they're scared. Well, look at the crowds he's gathering. Look at the works he can do that we can't do. Look how the people are talking about him no matter which town we go to. They're talking about Jesus, this Jesus guy. He's apparently the life of the party. He turns water into wine. He heals people. And they don't just claim to be healed. People we knew that were mute, they speak. People we knew that were blind, they walk around seeing. Lepers, not just one at a time, but up to 10 at a time, are healed before our eyes. This Jesus guy, they're threatened by him, aren't they? They're afraid of losing that power, that control, that security that comes with it. And so they don't see Jesus for who he is. They have to let their unconscious mind take over the conscious and jump to some really radical, stupid idea of, well, maybe Satan's casting out other demons. Come on. You missed it because your mind was already made up. You missed it. I think we miss a lot of opportunities to learn and grow and be drivers of peace in our churches and in our country. Because we have heard teachings, the same teachings, over and over again in our churches. And we've read them in books, and we've heard them in podcasts, and we've watched them online. And these teachings in and of themselves are not bad and not evil. But if we get so fixated on them that we are unable now to think critically, to ask questions, to seek other people's perspectives, what that is going to create is a divisive culture. Now, I'm not saying that you need to be open to other people's beliefs or other people's political agendas. But what I am saying is, if we are so set in our conscious minds of our way or the highway that we can't even ask questions or learn about other people's ways, what that effectively does is it shuts down this really important thing that we call empathy. Empathy
is the way of understanding where someone else is at. It doesn't mean you believe the same thing that they believe. It doesn't mean you embrace it. But it means you sought out understanding in it. What that means is there has to be what? A dialogue. If we are so fixated on what we know in our unconscious minds because it has been drilled in over years and years of teaching that we are now unable to even sit with somebody and ask, well, why do you believe that? Tell me about your beliefs. Tell me about that perspective politically. Tell me about why you don't like that idea. We lack the ability to connect with them now because our unconscious has taken over our conscious. God has given us the very tool needed to say, this is what I believe, this is what I hold dear, but that doesn't mean I have to be threatened to learn what other people hold dear and why they hold it dear. There are tons of different denominations, as I shared with you at the beginning of this message. Many of them are founded and upheld by incredibly godly men that are much smarter than me, and they believe different things than I believe. They have different interpretations of this book. Maybe they're a pre-tribulation Christian and I'm a post-tribulation Christian. That doesn't make them idiots, because they are highly intelligent people also seeking the Spirit's leading, and they landed somewhere differently than me. If I cut that person completely out and I can't have fellowship now with them, we have a problem. Doesn't mean I have to believe what they believe. Again, I want to emphasize that. But we need to be willing to engage across the aisle. With different political spectrums, different religious spectrums. We need to be willing to listen and ask questions. Because if we ever expect what we have so certain in our unconscious mind to ever take hold in their minds, it's going to happen through that conscious dialogue, through that engagement. It's just not going to happen by accident. This is really disturbing to me. I have friends on both ends of the political spectrum, some that are diehard Republicans, some that are diehard Democrats. And as I engage with both of them, something I see on both sides is this unwillingness to say anything good whatsoever about the other party's candidate. They literally can't say anything. I can't say anything good about Obama, not one little single thing. Okay, we have a problem then, because he's still made in the image of God. And you're telling me every single decision and every single little thing he did during his presidency was junk? Everything, across the board, no matter what. Come on. That's not going to bring about dialogue and empathy and conversation. And the same thing goes with my friends that, well, if you voted for Trump, then you're a terrible person. Well, come on. It's those mindsets that are the problem. We've adapted to groupthink because it's heard something over and over and over again. In fact, if you don't believe me that this is a problem in the United States, look no further than social media. Social media, Facebook, Instagram, they have come out and they have blatantly told us that they purposely will only put people in your feed that believe the same things you believe. They want you to embrace groupthink. They want you to be surrounded by yes men. Because there's no growth in that. There's no empathy in that. There's no understanding where my fellow man is coming from. Why is Jim down the street a Democrat? What has happened in his life that has shaped that? What in his family history? Why are these policies important to him? Because there's a reason for it. And it's my job to connect with the man, not the policy or the politician. Because if I can connect with the man, now I have an opportunity to show Jesus to him. So I really want to challenge us this morning. I really want to challenge us to do 3 different things. I want to give you 3 ways that you can start to actively engage your conscious mind again. To fall out of this trap or this lure, if you will, of falling victim to just our conscious mind our unconscious mind that is taking over. First off, I'm going to recommend 2 books to you. These are both written by Christian people. They're both leaders in their field. In fact, Dr. Carolyn Leaf is the world's most renowned neuroscientist. She has a book called Switch on Your Brain. Tons of awesome stuff in this book. Every chapter, she gives a Bible verse to back up the scientific evidence that she's putting forth. One of those examples, this is really neat. You know in Lamentations where it talks about how the Lord's mercies are new every morning? Talks about that. Did you know every single morning when you woke up, there are new nerve cells, baby nerve cells that have formed in your brain overnight? And those nerve cells allow you to learn and rethink things or throw out old things that you don't need anymore. Literally, God's mercies are new in your brain every single morning. Isn't that beautiful? So the book has lots of good stuff like that. It tells you how to rewire your brain. That's great. The other one's called A Better Way to Think by Norman Wright. He's a long-time counselor, therapist. Great, great book on a better way to think. So that our conscious mind is not constantly driving everything we do, and our unconscious mind again, I'm sorry, but our conscious mind is there to be critical and think through things and learn more. So that's the first piece I'm going to give you. The second thing I'm going to give you, because I think it's important, I don't like to stand up here and preach and say, hey, you're doing something wrong. Or to say, hey, Jesus is the answer, but not give you practical ways. I don't like that. So that's the first practical thing you can do. You can buy those books. I don't have a stake in these or anything, so I'm not trying to get some kickbacks here. Wink, wink. Just good books. The second thing you can do is what I call the Philippians 4:8 principle. The Philippians 4:8 principle. Anybody know what Philippians 4:8 says? Anybody at all? I bet you do if I start to say it to you. Whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, depending on the translation, whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is notable, or that whole verse, dwell on these things. It's another way that the Bible has really backed up scientifically neuroscience, because anything you have built in your brain that is negative, your brain has the ability to rebuild for the positive. It's called neuroplasticity. Your brain literally can take these negative things you built, a negative perception, and you can rebuild it to be positive. Whatever the brain builds, the brain can also tear down. It's amazing, right? So, next time, let's say you hear about another Christian pastor or author that you don't fully agree with. Let's say instead of just having that thought, man, but he said this a couple weeks ago and I really disagree with that. If you leave that thought unchecked, you know where it goes? It follows that path to the unconscious brain and it reinforces the thought. Right? And that argument and that feeling against that person grows in that unconscious brain. And maybe that thought you had is true. Maybe you do disagree with that thing they said in this interview. But guess what? That person has probably also said lots of things you agree with. And that person probably has a ministry that has impacted lots of people for Jesus Christ. So maybe when you have that thought of, I disagree with what they said here, you can balance it with Philippians 4:8 principle and say, but you know what? It's also a man of God that has had a huge impact in his city. And there are endless testimonies of how his teaching has helped people come to Christ. Now you know what happens? Both of those thoughts travel down your subconscious pathway into your unbiased brain, and you have a more balanced view, a more biblical view, according to Philippians 4:8. Does that make sense? Next time you have a negative thought about somebody in your congregation, about a political candidate, whatever it is, try to balance it with the positive that you can find. Because I don't care how despicable that person is in your eyes, or how despicable whatever news agency you listen to tells you to think of that person, they're still made in the image of God. We still got to try and find that good to balance that negativity. So try the Philippians 4:8 principle. And last but not least, engage with people that don't have the same beliefs and perspectives that you do. What are you worried about? You're worried that they're going to convert you to whatever they believe? If that's truly a worry you have bigger problems in your faith. I'm sorry. No one, go into the conversation. I'm not trying to convert you, you're not trying to convert me, but we need to be able to learn from each other. This world needs more peace. You're not going to make me an atheist. You're not going to make me a Mormon. You're not going to any of those things. One of the best men at my wedding is an atheist. And he gives me so much valuable insight about this world. About how people that don't believe think. And I give him insight into the Christian mind and brain and heart. He's the one I think I've told you about. He's the worst atheist in the world. He asks me to pray for him all the time. Why do you ask me to pray for you? We got to engage with people that believe and think differently than we do. In fact, in Europe, this is a growing trend. They have people libraries where there's no books. You go in and you say, hey, I'm looking for somebody that maybe is of the Hindu faith. There's somebody there waiting to connect with somebody of the Christian faith, and they sit you down and you talk. And you just learn from each other. Isn't that kind of a wild idea? And the only rule is both parties need to listen. So you know what that means? If we truly believe that the gospel is the only way, the only truth, and the only life, that means we always have the advantage. All we have to do is listen to their stuff, and then we get to share our stuff, which we believe at the heart of hearts is the true life power to change lives. And we plant the seed by sharing, well, here's what I believe and why I believe it. And then we can walk away and let the Spirit do its work. But that can't happen if our unconscious mind is so determined not to engage with anyone that thinks or believes or votes differently. Spend time with people that think and believe and vote differently than you. Not for the sake of conversion, but for the sake of learning. Because learning is needed for empathy, for connection, for showing love. Empathy is needed. I want to close by going back to Africa. The sermon started with a story from Africa, so I want to end it with a story from Africa. How many of you are familiar with Nelson Mandela? Yeah? Nelson Mandela was president of South Africa, voted in 1994. Greatest president in their history. Believe it or not, he was voted into presidency 3 years after being released from prison for 33 years. There's a story in Nelson Mandela's autobiography of after being in prison for 27 years for just standing up for his right and his race's right to vote and have the same privileges as the white people of South Africa. They put him in prison on an island for 27 years. And after this 27-year imprisonment, the last few years of his term, he was allowed to be in house arrest on the mainland. And there's this scene based off his autobiography. This movie was made called A Long Walk to Freedom. And there's this scene where Nelson Mandela's grandkids are in the backyard playing. And these are grandkids he's never met. Because remember, he's been in prison for 27 years. So while he's in prison, his kids grew up. They got married. They had kids. And so he's seeing some of these kids for the first time, and they're all in the backyard spending time grilling out. They call it a braai in South Africa. They're braaiing. And these kids are on the other side of the yard making faces at the white guards that are standing around the perimeter because he's still under house arrest. You know, they're doing the little kid, shaking their butt in the guards' faces. And Nelson Mandela calls them over. And he says, "Are you doing that because of the color of their skin?" And they say, "Yes, Papa." And he says, "No, we do better to them because that's what they did to us. We do better." That kind of perspective is the kind of perspective that changed that whole nation. They are 30 years behind in their civil rights movement than we are. Black people became free in 1994 there, and I'm telling you, after living there for 5 years, they are actually 30 years ahead because of that leadership, that willingness to grow across the aisle. Mandela's unconscious mind didn't say, "No, white people are evil no matter what, no matter, we can't engage with them, we can't." That's the problem. His conscious mind saw his kids acting in a way that they fought against, and he said, "We don't do to them what they did to us. We do better." That's powerful, isn't it? That's what we need in our churches and in our country. That conscious ability to step back and say, I hear what you're saying. I see that you're hurt. I may not agree with your movement fully, but I want to learn more about it. How did you get to this place you're this passionate about it? What's happened in your life to make you be so hurt, to shout this way? Tell me your sorrows, because I know a guy whose burden is light. Tell me. But if we aren't willing to cross the aisle, I'm fearful of thinking that 15, 20 years from now, people are going to be driving through our country and there's just going to be shells of what used to be families of God. Because we had an unwillingness and an inability to step across the aisle and engage.